I want you to picture something for me. A room full of string lights, champagne glasses catching the light, 40 of the people I loved most in the world, all dressed up, all smiling, all holding little glasses of Prosecco like this was the happiest night of the year. And me, standing in the back corner of that room, holding a manila folder like it was a loaded gun. Because in about 90 seconds, I was going to stand up in front of everyone my ex-boyfriend and my former best friend had ever loved. His parents, her parents, our mutual friends, the priest who was supposed to marry them in 6 months, and I was going to tell them exactly what kind of people they were about to celebrate. Not with screaming, not with tears. I'd already cried every tear I had months before, alone on my bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, with my phone lighting up my face, staring at a text message that wasn't meant for me. No. Tonight, I was calm. Tonight, I had receipts. See, this wasn't just an engagement party. This was Derek and Chloe's engagement party. My Derek, my Chloe, the man I loved for 3 years and the woman I called my sister since we were 19 years old, standing under an arch of white roses that I recognized because I was the one who'd helped Chloe pick that exact arch out on Pinterest back when she was still pretending to be my best friend and not the woman sleeping with my boyfriend. I remember the exact moment the room went quiet. Derek's father tapped his champagne glass with a spoon. Everyone turned to look at the happy couple. And that's when I stepped forward and said the 4 words that ended everything. Before you say yes. That's where we're going tonight. But to understand how I got to that moment, how I went from a woman who trusted her best friend with her whole life to a woman standing in a ballroom with a folder full of proof, I have to take you back to the beginning, back before I knew what either of them was really capable of. Stay with me, because what I found out along the way is so much worse than just an affair. Hey, welcome back. If this is your first time here, I'm the one telling you this story tonight, and I promise you by the end of it, you are going to need to remind yourself to breathe. This is a true story about betrayal, about the 2 people I trusted most on this earth, and about the moment I stopped being the victim and became the person writing the ending. Before we dive in, if you've ever been cheated on, ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to have your back, drop a comment and let me know you're listening, because I want to hear from you. And listen, subscribe now. Seriously, do it now before you get pulled into this story, because trust me, this one gets so much worse before it gets better. There's a twist coming in about 40 minutes that even I didn't see coming while I was living it, and I don't want you to miss it because you forgot to hit that button. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that 3 years ago, I was 28 years old, freshly promoted at my marketing job, and completely, stupidly in love with a man named Derek. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party. He made a joke about the bartender's tragic lime-cutting technique, and I laughed so hard I nearly spit my drink out. He bought me another one to make up for it. That was it. That was the whole beginning of us. For the first year, Derek was everything I thought I wanted. He remembered small things like that I liked my coffee with oat milk, that I hated when people chewed with their mouths open, that my dad's birthday was in March and I always got quiet around that time because we weren't close. He showed up. He texted good morning. He met my parents within 4 months and made my mom laugh so hard she cried. I want to spend a little more time here in the good part because I think it matters for you to understand exactly what I thought I had before I tell you what it actually was. Derek used to leave little sticky notes on the bathroom mirror before he left for work. Dumb little things like, "You're going to crush that presentation today," or just a badly drawn heart. I kept a shoebox of them for over a year. I still have that shoebox, actually, tucked in the back of my closet. I haven't opened it since the breakup, and I'm honestly not sure I ever will, but I haven't been able to throw it away either. He learned how to make my mom's lasagna recipe just so he could surprise her with it on her birthday. He drove 4 hours round trip once just to bring me soup when I had the flu and couldn't stop crying about missing an important meeting. Those aren't the actions of someone who doesn't care. And that's actually the hardest part of all of this to reconcile, even now. Derek wasn't a cartoon villain twirling a mustache the entire 3 years. He was, for long stretches of that relationship, genuinely present, genuinely kind, genuinely someone I believed loved me. That's what made the betrayal so disorienting. It wasn't that I'd been a fool the entire time, it was that someone capable of real tenderness was also simultaneously capable of this. And then there was Chloe. Chloe and I had been best friends since college. We were the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences, who had a shared notes app list of inside jokes, who called each other at 1 a.m. just to talk about nothing. When my dad passed away 2 years into knowing her, Chloe was the one who sat with me in the hospital parking lot for 4 hours because I couldn't make myself walk to my car. I trusted her with everything, my secrets, my fears, my relationship, especially my relationship. Chloe met Derek about 2 months after I started dating him. I remember introducing them at a barbecue at my apartment complex's rooftop, watching them shake hands, thinking these are my two favorite people in the world meeting each other. I had no idea what that sentence would come to mean. Looking back now, and I want to be honest with you because this is the part where hindsight turns warm memories into ice water down your spine, there were things I should have noticed. Little things that felt like nothing at the time. Like how Chloe started showing up more. She'd happened to be in the area when Derek and I were getting dinner. She'd text him directly instead of going through our group chat, which used to be normal for friends, but started to feel different. I remember one night, the three of us were watching a movie at my place, and I fell asleep on the couch around 11. When I woke up an hour later, they were both gone from the living room. Derek said Chloe left early and he'd gone to bed. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? There was the trip to Lake Tahoe, my idea actually, a girls' trip with Chloe and 2 other friends, except Chloe convinced me it'd be so much more fun if the guys tagged along for one night. Derek came up Friday evening. I have photos from that weekend. In every single one, Chloe is standing just a little too close to him. I used to look at those photos and think we all look so happy. Now I can't look at them at all. I want to pause here and say something because I know some of you are already yelling at your screen. How did you not see it? And I get it. From the outside, hindsight makes everything obvious. But love, real love, or what you think is real love, makes you generous with your trust. It makes you build explanations for things that don't need an explanation unless you're looking for one. I wasn't looking. I had no reason to look. My boyfriend was affectionate. My best friend was loyal. Why would I ever imagine those 2 words could betray me at the same time with each other? I should also tell you more about what Chloe meant to me during this stretch of time, because I don't think the betrayal lands with its full weight unless you understand exactly what role she played in my life. Chloe wasn't just someone I grabbed brunch with on weekends. She was the person I called when I got the promotion at work before I even called my own mother. She was the person who helped me pick out the dress I wore to my cousin's wedding, who sat with me for 3 hours in a fitting room while I cried about how much my dad would have loved seeing me in it. She had a key to my apartment. She knew my Wi-Fi password, my coffee order, the name of my childhood dog, the exact wording of the fight my parents had the year before my dad passed that I'd never told anyone else. When I think about the sheer volume of trust I handed her over a decade of friendship, and then think about her spending nearly a year lying to my face while holding all of that, it's not just the affair that feels like the betrayal anymore. It's every single one of those quiet, ordinary moments of trust, retroactively poisoned by the knowledge of what she was doing behind them. By year 2, Derek started proposing the idea of us moving together. I was thrilled. We started apartment hunting. I remember telling Chloe the news over wine on my kitchen counter, and she squealed and hugged me so tight I nearly spilled my glass. "I'm so happy for you," she said. I believed every word. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out for another 8 months, was that 2 weeks before that conversation, Chloe had kissed my boyfriend in the parking garage of his office building at a work event she wasn't even invited to, but showed up at to surprise him for me, she said. 2 weeks before she hugged me and told me she was so happy for us. There's a version of this story where I tell you the red flags were flashing neon the whole time and I just refused to see them. That's partially true, but there's another version, the one I've had to make peace with, where some people are simply good at being invisible while they destroy your life. Chloe wasn't sloppy. She was careful. She played the best friend role so well that even now, some nights, I still catch myself missing the version of her I thought existed. We moved in together in the spring. Derek proposed to helping me pick out throw pillows, insisted on doing the grocery shopping every week because that's what partners do, told me more than once that he could see us doing this forever. I remember lying in bed one night, him asleep next to me, and genuinely thinking, I am the luckiest woman alive. I want you to hold on to that feeling for a second, because I'm about to take it away from both of us. About 4 months after we moved in together, small things started to shift. Derek got busier at work, later nights, more weekend trips for conferences, a new habit of turning his phone screen down the second I walked into a room. I noticed. I asked. He had an answer for everything, smooth as silk. Work stress, a difficult client, a promotion he was nervous about. And Chloe? Chloe started pulling away from our friendship just slightly. Fewer late-night calls, shorter replies. When I asked if everything was okay between us, she told me she'd just been going through some stuff and needed space. I gave her that space because that's what you do for people you love. I had no idea I was giving her space to keep doing exactly what she'd been doing all along, just with less oversight. There's one moment from this period I think about more than almost any other. It was a Tuesday. Derek came home late, said he'd grab dinner with the guys from work. I remember kissing him hello and catching a very specific, very familiar perfume on his collar. Chloe's perfume, the one I'd bought her for her birthday 2 years earlier because she'd fallen in love with it at the mall. I actually said something. I said, "You smell like Chloe's perfume," and Derek didn't even blink. He laughed and said half the office wears that brand. It's from Sephora. Everyone has it. I laughed too. I let it go. Looking back, that's the moment that haunts me most. Not because I should have caught them right then and there. I couldn't have known for certain. But because some small, quiet part of me, some instinct buried under 3 years of trust, knew something was wrong, and I had talked myself out of listening to it. I want you to remember that feeling too, because it's going to come back later in a much bigger way. There's another memory from that stretch of time I have to tell you about, because it's the one my sister brings up most when we talk about all of this now. It was Thanksgiving, month 4 of living together. Derek's whole family came to our apartment, his parents, his cousins, even his grandmother, who I adored, who used to call me the good one, like she somehow already knew there was a bad one waiting in the wings. Chloe wasn't invited to that dinner. She wasn't family, not officially, just my best friend. But halfway through dinner, Derek got up to take a work call and was gone for almost 25 minutes. When he came back, his grandmother asked, half joking, if everything was okay at his job, working him this hard on a holiday. He laughed it off, said it was a client emergency, sat back down and reached for my hand under the table like nothing had happened. I found out almost a year later, reading through those messages on the iPad, that the work call was a 25-minute phone call with Chloe, who'd apparently been upset that she was spending the holiday alone and wanted him to at least call if he couldn't be with her. I read that message and felt something in my chest cave in, because I remembered exactly what that day it felt like from the inside. Warm, full, normal. And now I know that the whole time, 20 feet away, my boyfriend was consoling my best friend for not being able to have him on a day I thought was just for us. I also want to tell you about the ring. About 6 months before everything came out, Derek took me to visit his grandmother's house, just the two of us, and she pulled out a small velvet box from her jewelry armoire, her own engagement ring, from over 50 years of marriage, offered to Derek for when the time is right. I remember sitting in that living room, this sweet, sharp-eyed old woman looking back and forth between us like she was already picturing the wedding, and Derek squeezing my hand under the table just like he had at Thanksgiving. He took that ring. I know now because his grandmother mentioned it to me after everything came out that he'd taken it for safekeeping until he was ready. I have no idea to this day whether that ring ever made it into a box meant for Chloe's hand instead of mine, and honestly, I've stopped letting myself wonder about it because some questions don't deserve any more of my time than they've already taken. By month 5 of living together, I started noticing the pattern more clearly if I still couldn't name it. Derek's work trips always seemed to line up suspiciously close to times Chloe was out of town visiting family. I noted it. I didn't confront it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that stress from my dad's anniversary month was making me suspicious of everyone, that I needed to trust the people I loved. There's one more moment from this period that I have to mention because it's the one that, looking back, feels almost unbearably obvious now. I'd started casually planning my own future bachelorette party. Nothing official. Derek and I weren't even engaged yet, but Chloe and I used to joke about it the way best friends do, dreaming up destinations, matching sashes, all of it. One night, Chloe suggested, almost too casually, that we should practice with a smaller weekend trip first, just the two of us and maybe a couple other friends, somewhere close. I picked a small coastal town about 2 hours away. I remember being excited about it for weeks. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, Chloe canceled. A family emergency, she said, very convincingly upset on the phone. I felt terrible for her. I told her not to worry about it, that we'd reschedule. I found out almost a year later that the family emergency was actually Derek telling her the night before that he changed his mind about a work trip and would be around that weekend after all, and Chloe had canceled on me so she could spend the weekend with him instead, in an apartment I was paying half the rent on, while I sat at home nursing a mild cold and texting her, "Feel better soon. Family stuff is so stressful. Love you." I want to sit with that one for a second, because I think it's the moment, more than almost any other, that shows you exactly how deep this went. It wasn't just stolen nights here and there. It was an active, ongoing willingness to cancel plans with me, to lie directly to my face about why, so the two of them could have unsupervised time together in the very home I was building with one of them. But what happened next, I never saw coming. Because the truth wasn't just that Derek was cheating on me, and it wasn't just that he was cheating with my best friend, it was how long it had been going on, how deep the lie went, and how close I came to marrying into it without ever finding out. That's coming up in Act 2, but first, I need you to really sit with where I was emotionally in this moment, because what happens next breaks that world completely apart. The night I found out started like the most boring Tuesday of my life. Derek was at a conference in Denver, 3 days, standard for his job by then. I had the apartment to myself, so I did what any tired, overworked 29-year-old does when her boyfriend's away. I ordered Thai food, put on a trashy reality show, and fell asleep on the couch with my phone still in my hand. I woke up around midnight to my phone buzzing. Not my phone, actually. Derek's old iPad, the one he never used anymore because he'd upgraded to a newer one, the one that still had our shared Apple ID logged in from back when we set up our smart home stuff together. A message notification had popped up on the lock screen from a contact saved as C. Hart. I want to tell you I hesitated. I didn't. My stomach dropped so fast I felt it in my teeth, and I unlocked that iPad before I even finished the thought this could ruin everything. The message said, "Miss you already. Hurry back so we can finish what we started before you left, LOL." I sat there for what felt like an hour, but was probably 10 seconds. My brain did this thing where it tried to build me an escape hatch. Maybe it's a coworker. Maybe C is Carl from accounting. Maybe I'm about to embarrass myself over nothing. I clicked into the thread. It wasn't Carl from accounting. It was Chloe. I scrolled up and up and up. Messages going back, I counted later, 11 months. 11 months of miss you, of can't wait to see you, of photos I won't describe here because some things don't need to be repeated, only understood. 11 months of my boyfriend and my best friend building an entire secret relationship inside the walls of the life I thought I was building with him. The sheer volume of it is hard to describe unless you've lived through something similar. It wasn't just a handful of damning texts. It was thousands of messages spanning almost a full year, an entire parallel relationship running underneath the one I thought I was living. There were good morning texts sent within minutes of the good morning texts Derek sent me. There were plans made for girls' night. There were actually cover stories Chloe fed me so she could see him. There was an entire private nickname Derek had for her that I'd never once heard him use. Tender and specific in a way that made my stomach turn because I recognized the cadence of it. It was the same kind of nickname he'd given me in our first few months together, recycled like it meant nothing the second around. I found the message from the night of our Lake Tahoe trip. "Chloe, tell her you're tired. Meet me by the dock in 10. I found messages from the week I told Chloe we were moving in together, the same week she hugged me and told me she was so happy for us. Derek that same night, "She has no idea. I hate this, but I can't stop." I read that sentence probably 30 times, not because I didn't understand it, because I was trying to find a version of it that didn't mean what it obviously meant. There wasn't one. I want to talk about what the next few hours felt like, because I think anyone who's been through this understands there's a very specific kind of numbness that arrives before the grief does. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not yet. I sat on my kitchen floor at 1 in the morning and methodically took screenshots of every single message, every photo, every timestamp, working backward through 11 months of my own life like I was diffusing a bomb. I don't know where that instinct came from, the instinct to document instead of detonate. Maybe it was some buried part of me that already knew, even in that moment of pure devastation, that I was going to need proof, that the truth alone wasn't going to be enough, because both of them were the kind of people who could look you in the eye and lie beautifully. Around 3 a.m., I finally cried, not pretty crying, the kind where you can't catch your breath, where your whole body just folds in on itself. I remember calling my sister and just saying Chloe and Derek over and over because I couldn't get any other words out, and she understood immediately because she'd never trusted Chloe the way I did. She tried to tell me once years ago, and I defended Chloe so hard my sister never brought it up again. That's its own kind of gut punch, by the way, finding out the person who tried to warn you was right the whole time. I also called my mom that night, even though it was almost 4 a.m. by the time I worked up the nerve. She didn't say much at first. She just listened to me, sobbed through the story piece by piece. And then she said something I've held on to ever since. "You don't have to decide what you're going to do about this tonight. Tonight, you just have to get through tonight." That sentence became a kind of mantra for me over the following weeks. I didn't have to have a plan yet. I didn't have to know how I felt about Chloe yet, or what I wanted to say to Derek yet. I just had to survive the next few hours, and then the next few after that. I didn't confront Derek that night. I know some of you are yelling at your screen right now wondering why. Here's why. I needed him to not know that I knew. Not yet. Because the second he found out, he and Chloe would coordinate their story, delete evidence, get their lies straight. I'd seen enough of Chloe's manipulative streak in small ways over the years, talking her way out of arguments, rewriting history in her favor, to know that if I confronted them without proof locked down, I would somehow end up looking like the unstable one. So I waited. I backed up every screenshot to 3 separate places. I forwarded the most damning threads to my own email. I even, and this part still makes me sick to admit, kept acting normal around both of them for the better part of a week, smiling through a dinner with Chloe where she asked me how wedding planning with Derek was going, like she hadn't been sleeping with him for almost a year. I can't believe this isn't a strong enough phrase for what that dinner felt like. I sat across from a woman I'd known for a decade, who held my hand at my father's funeral, who I trusted with the password to my email account, and she asked me about my future with the man she was actively destroying it with. She smiled. She ordered a second glass of wine. She complimented my dress. I smiled back. I complimented hers. When Derek got back from Denver, I studied him differently than I ever had before. I noticed how easily the lies came. Conference ran long, spotty Wi-Fi at the hotel, missed you so much, babe, delivered with the same warmth he'd used for 3 straight years. It made me wonder, and honestly, it still makes me wonder, how much of the last 3 years had been this easy for him. How much of "I love you" had just been a sentence he was good at saying. I finally broke about 10 days after I found the messages. Not because I planned to, because Derek made an offhand comment that flipped something in me. We were watching TV, and a commercial came on for an engagement ring company, and he said, half joking, "Maybe I should get you an upgrade for our anniversary." And something about the casualness of it, proposing an upgraded ring to me while actively planning a future with someone else, made the numbness crack. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I muted the TV, turned to him, and said, "Who's Seahart on your old iPad?" I watched his face do something I will never forget. It wasn't confusion. It was calculation. I watched him decide in real time which lie to try first. He went with denial. "What are you talking about?" I went with evidence. I read him 3 messages, word for word, from memory, because I'd read them so many times they were burned into me. What happened next is the part people always ask me about. Did he cry? Did he apologize? Did he beg? The honest answer is he did all 3 in that order, and none of it moved me, because I'd already spent 10 days grieving the relationship in private. By the time we had that conversation, I wasn't discovering a betrayal anymore. I was confirming one. He told me it just happened. He told me Chloe had pursued him and he'd been weak. He told me it had only been a few months, which I knew with total certainty was a lie because I had the timestamps. 11 months, since 3 months before I moved in with him, since before he told me he could see us doing this forever. I asked him one question that night, and it's the one that I think broke something open in him because he didn't have a smooth answer ready for it. I asked, "Did you help me pick out this apartment knowing you were still sleeping with her?" He didn't answer. He just looked at the floor. That silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I asked him why, too, the question everyone asks, the question that never actually has a satisfying answer. He gave me a version of, "I don't know, I just got caught up in it," which is the kind of answer that sounds like an explanation, but is actually just a shrug dressed up in more words. I pushed harder. I asked if it was something I did, something I didn't do, something missing in us that he went looking for somewhere else. He said no. He said, and I remember this word for word because it took my breath away, "You didn't do anything wrong. I think I just liked feeling like I was getting away with something." I sat with that sentence for a long time after he said it, because it told me something important. This wasn't about me failing to be enough. This was never really about me at all. It was about some hollow, restless thing in him that had nothing to do with the quality of the relationship we built. That realization didn't make the pain disappear, but it did eventually help me stop blaming myself for it, which I think is its own kind of gift, even if it came wrapped in the worst possible packaging. I want to take a second here, because this is usually where these stories jump straight to the confrontation with a best friend, or the big blowout fight, or the moving out. And that all happened. I moved out within 2 weeks into my sister's guest room with a settled, quiet fury that surprised even me. But I actually want to slow down on one detail, because it's the piece that turned this from a breakup story into a revenge story. When I finally confronted Chloe, over the phone, because I genuinely couldn't stomach being in the same room as her yet, she didn't apologize either. Not really. She cried, sure. She said things like, "I never meant to hurt you, and it wasn't supposed to go this far." But buried in that conversation was a sentence that changed everything for me. She said, "You have to understand I've loved him longer than you have." I actually laughed out loud when she said that, not because it was funny, because it was so absurd, so revealing that I realized in that exact moment, Chloe didn't feel guilty, she felt entitled. She wasn't sorry she betrayed me, she was sorry she'd been caught before she was ready to be caught. That's when something shifted in me. Grief is one thing, but looking someone in the eye, even over the phone, and hearing them justify 11 months of lying to your face, that doesn't make you sad anymore. That makes you sharp. I moved out. I blocked both of their numbers. I spent about 6 weeks in what I can only describe as survival mode. Work, sleep, my sister's couch, repeat. Friends reached out. Some of our mutual friends quietly picked sides, which taught me a lot about who actually knew me versus who just liked being around the drama of a golden couple. I want to tell you about a few of those weeks in more detail, because I think it matters, and because I know some of you watching are living through your own version of this right now. The first week, I barely ate. My sister would put a plate of food in front of me, and I'd stare at it like it was written in a language I no longer understood. I called out of work twice, which I never do, and my manager, bless her, just said, "Take whatever time you need," without asking a single question. The second week was worse, honestly, because the numbness had worn off and the anger hadn't fully arrived yet. That week was just grief, raw and unfiltered. Grief for the relationship, grief for the version of my future I'd been building in my head for 3 years that simply didn't exist anymore. I remember standing in my sister's kitchen at 11 at night, crying so hard I couldn't catch my breath, and her just holding on to me, not saying anything, because there was nothing to say. Somewhere around week 3, a strange thing happened. A few of Chloe's other friends, people I'd known peripherally through her for years, started reaching out to me. Not to comfort me exactly, to ask me questions. Is it true? Did she really do that? How long did you know? I realized slowly that the story was already spreading without my help in fragmented half-true versions, the way these things always do. People were choosing sides based on secondhand gossip before I'd even fully processed what happened to me. That's actually when the first seed of what would become my plan took root, though I didn't recognize it yet. I remember thinking very clearly, if people are going to talk about this, no matter what I do, I at least want them talking about what actually happened, not whatever version serves Chloe best. By week 5, I'd started therapy, something I probably should have started years earlier, if I'm honest, given everything with my dad. My therapist, a calm, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Patel, said something in our second session that stuck with me for the rest of this whole process. She said, "You're allowed to grieve this and still be strategic about how you respond to it. Those two things aren't in conflict." I don't think I fully understood what she meant until months later, standing in that ballroom with a folder in my hands. And then, about 4 months after the breakup, I heard through the group chat grapevine that Derek and Chloe were officially together, publicly. No shame, no hiding. They'd moved in together within weeks of me moving out, into an apartment I later found out he'd started looking at with her 3 months before I even found the messages. But what happened next, I never saw coming. Because 8 months after that, 8 months of me slowly rebuilding my life, going to therapy, reconnecting with my sister, actually starting to feel like myself again, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Derek's cousin, someone I'd always liked, someone who clearly didn't know the full history, sending me a save the date for Derek and Chloe's engagement party. I stared at that text for a long time, and in that moment, something clicked into place that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with clarity. Because I realized they had never once in 8 months imagined that I might find out. They thought the story was over. They thought I was the girl who got cheated on and quietly disappeared. They had no idea what I'd been building quietly in the background for the last 8 months. Because I hadn't just been healing, I'd been documenting, and I was about to become the last person on earth they wanted to see walk into that ballroom. I need to back up for a second because I skipped over something important. Those 8 months between the breakup and the save the date weren't just healing in some vague, soft focus way. They were the months I quietly, methodically built a case. Here's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal like this. Your first instinct is to want them to feel what you felt. Not through violence, not through anything illegal. I want to be really clear about that because everything I'm about to tell you, I ran past a lawyer friend of mine before I ever acted on it. What I wanted was for the truth to exist in a room where it couldn't be talked away, where Chloe couldn't spin it, where Derek couldn't soften it, where their parents and friends and future in-laws couldn't be lied to the way I had been. So, starting about a month after the breakup, once the initial shock wore off enough for my brain to function again, I started organizing everything I had. Not for revenge yet. At that point, I told myself it was for my own sanity, so I'd stop gaslighting myself into thinking maybe I'd overreacted. I built a folder, a literal physical folder, plus a backed up digital one with printed screenshots, timestamps, and a written timeline in my own handwriting so I could keep the facts straight in my head. I want to be honest, for the first few months, I didn't know what I was building it for. I just knew I needed it to exist somewhere solid, somewhere real, because Chloe was already, through mutual friends, starting to rewrite history to make herself the reluctant heroine of a love story instead of the woman who'd been sneaking around with my boyfriend for almost a year while planning my bridal shower in the group chat. Around month 5, I started noticing something else. A mutual friend of ours, I'll call her Priya because she asked me not to use her real name in case this ever got shared, reached out to me completely unprompted. Priya had been friends with Chloe even longer than I had, going back to high school. She told me that Chloe wasn't just cheating with Derek. Chloe had cheated on at least one prior boyfriend the same way, quietly over many months, with someone close to that boyfriend's life, and had managed to walk away from it completely clean, reputation intact, because she'd always been careful to control the narrative before anyone else could. That's when I understood I wasn't just dealing with one bad decision Chloe made in a weak moment. I was dealing with a pattern, and patterns don't stop unless something forces them to. I still didn't have a plan yet. What I had was information, and information without a strategy is just pain you're carrying around for no reason. So I sat with it. I kept living my life. I actually started dating again around month 6. Nothing serious, just enough to remember that I was still a whole person outside of what had happened to me. I got a small promotion at work. I started running again, which had been my dad's thing, something I'd let go of after he passed and picked back up almost by accident one Saturday morning. Then the save the date arrived, and everything crystallized at once. I remember sitting with that card in my hands, engraved, "Save the date for Derek and Chloe's engagement celebration," with a little illustration of 2 intertwined rings, and feeling something settle into place that had been circling for months without a shape. I wasn't going to write an angry email. I wasn't going to post something vague on social media and let people speculate. I wasn't going to show up and scream. I was going to let them plan the exact room, the exact night, the exact audience, and I was going to use all of it against them. Here's what the plan actually looked like, step by step, because I know this is the part you're really here for. I called Derek's cousin, the one who'd sent the save the date, casually, like I was just catching up. Turns out, Chloe's mother, who I'd always gotten along with, who had no idea about the affair's actual timeline because Chloe had fed her a sanitized version, had insisted I be invited. She thought of me as family. She didn't know what family had actually done to me. That single detail told me everything I needed about how deep the lie had spread. It wasn't just friends being fooled. It was Chloe's own mother. I went back through every screenshot, every message, every timestamp, and I built a clean, simple timeline, not an emotional rant, just dates and facts, because I knew if this ever needed to be shown to anyone, it had to look undeniable, not unhinged. I cross-referenced the dates against real-world events, my father's death anniversary, the Lake Tahoe trip, the day I signed the lease with Derek, the day I told Chloe we were moving in together. Every single major painful milestone in my life during that relationship had a corresponding message thread proving they were lying to me the entire time. This is the part where Priya came back into the story. I told her what I was planning, not the affair reveal itself, because I hadn't fully decided on that yet, but the fact that I'd been invited and that I wasn't going to sit quietly through it. Priya, it turned out, had her own reason to want the truth out. She told me something I didn't know, that Chloe, in the months since getting together publicly with Derek, had also been messaging an ex of hers, someone from years before Derek, the exact same way she'd messaged Derek while we were together. Miss you, late night texts, the whole pattern repeating itself in real time, this time behind Derek's back. I sat with that information for a long time because on one hand, it wasn't my business anymore what Chloe did to Derek. But on the other hand, it told me something crucial. This wasn't a love story that justified the damage it caused. It was never really about Derek being some great love Chloe couldn't help falling into. It was a pattern of a woman who needed the thrill of being wanted by someone she wasn't supposed to have over and over, regardless of who had hurt. That detail mattered because it meant the reveal I was planning wasn't going to be about petty jealousy over losing a man to my best friend. It was about protecting a room full of people, Derek's family included, from walking into a marriage built on the exact same foundation that had already once betrayed someone in that very room, me. There's a detail I skipped that I want to go back to because a few people who've heard this story in person always ask about it. How did I actually get the courage to walk up in front of a room like that? The truth is, courage isn't really the word. I rehearsed. I know that sounds almost clinical, but in the 2 weeks before the party, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at night after my sister had gone to bed, and I said those 4 words out loud, "Before you say yes," probably 50 times, adjusting my tone each time until it came out sounding exactly the way I wanted it to. Calm, clear, not shaking. I also called the hotel where the party was being held under the guise of asking about their event spaces for a future booking, just to get a sense of the room layout, where the exits were, where the arch would likely be set up based on the floor plan they described to me. I wanted 0 surprises on the night itself. I wanted to know exactly where I'd be standing, exactly how far I'd need to walk, exactly how long it would take me to reach the front of that room from wherever I ended up during cocktail hour. I want to be really clear here because I know some of you might be expecting something dramatic and destructive, slashed tires, a public screaming match, showing up uninvited to cause a scene. I never once considered any of that. Not because I'm a saint, believe me, there were nights I fantasized about far messier things. but because I knew, even in my angriest moments, that the version of this story where I won wasn't the version where I became the villain of someone else's narrative. So here's what I decided. I would attend, I would say nothing until the exact moment the toast began, the traditional moment where the room goes quiet and the father of the groom or a close friend stands to speak before the couple says anything official. That's the moment I chose, because it's the one moment in a party like that where the entire room's attention is already, naturally, focused and silent. I printed the timeline, clean, dated, factual, no editorializing, because I wanted the facts to speak for themselves, not my anger. I made 4 copies, actually, because I decided I wasn't just going to say something out loud that could be denied or spun later. I was going to physically hand it to the 2 people whose opinions mattered most in that room, Derek's mother and Chloe's mother. 2 women who loved their children blindly, the way mothers do, and who deserved the chance to know the truth before they toasted to a lie. I also want to tell you a bit more about Priya, because up to this point, I've mostly mentioned her in passing, and she deserves more than that. Priya and Chloe had been friends since their freshman year of high school, closer in some ways than Chloe and I ever were, because they had that particular bond of having known each other since they were kids. When Priya first reached out to me, months after the breakup, she told me she'd been sitting on her own guilt for years. Back in college, Priya told me, she'd noticed something similar happening between Chloe and one of Priya's own boyfriends. Small things at first that she talked herself out of noticing the same way I had. By the time she was sure something was wrong, the relationship had already ended for unrelated reasons, and Priya never said anything, never confirmed her suspicions, because she didn't want to blow up a decade-long friendship over something she wasn't 100% certain about. I've regretted staying quiet for years, she told me, sitting across from me at a coffee shop about 6 months after my breakup. When I heard about you and Derek, I couldn't let myself do that again. That conversation is what gave me the confidence to keep building my case instead of just quietly moving on. It reminded me that silence, however well-intentioned, has a cost, and sometimes that cost gets paid by someone else down the line. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't scared. I ran the entire plan past my lawyer friend first, specifically to make sure I wasn't opening myself up to any kind of defamation claim, because everything I planned to say was true, and truth is an absolute defense, but I wanted zero ambiguity. I made sure every screenshot had metadata intact, nothing altered, nothing edited, timestamps visible and verifiable. My friend looked through everything and told me, "This isn't revenge. This is just the truth. You're allowed to tell people the truth." That sentence became something I repeated to myself over and over in the weeks leading up to the party, every time doubt crept in. This is just the truth. I also prepared myself emotionally, which honestly took more work than the paperwork did. I decided no matter what happened in that room, whether people believed me instantly, whether Chloe tried to twist it, whether Derek tried to make a scene of his own, I would stay calm, I would say what I needed to say once, clearly, and then I would let the room do what rooms full of decent people do when they finally see the truth. I wouldn't beg anyone to believe me. I would just make it impossible for them not to. The week before the party, something almost derailed everything. Priya called me, panicked, saying Chloe had somehow heard a rumor that someone was planning to cause drama at the engagement party. She didn't know it was me specifically, just that word had gotten back to her through the grapevine that people were talking. For about 24 hours, I genuinely thought I'd lost my window. I thought Chloe might preemptively call me, or worse, uninvite me entirely, and I'd lose the one moment where the truth could land in front of everyone who needed to hear it at once. But what happened next, I never saw coming. Chloe never called because, and I only found this out afterward, she'd assumed the rumor was about a completely different old friend of hers who she'd also burned in the past. She was so used to leaving a trail of damage behind her that she genuinely couldn't narrow down who the rumor might be about. She never once suspected it could be me, because in her mind, I was still the girl who quietly disappeared after the breakup, the girl who never fought back. There was actually a second near miss, one I haven't mentioned yet, that happened just 3 days before the party. Priya, who worked in the same office building as Chloe at the time, ran into Chloe unexpectedly in the elevator, and Chloe, apparently in a chatty, nervous mood about the upcoming party, mentioned offhand that she'd heard someone from the guest list had been asking pointed questions about the timeline of her relationship with Derek to a mutual acquaintance. Priya said her heart nearly stopped in that elevator, certain the whole plan was about to unravel right there between the 3rd and 7th floors. But Chloe, true to form, immediately assumed it was jealousy from an old college friend of hers who'd also dated someone Chloe had once shown interest in, and spent the rest of the elevator ride complaining about that friend instead of ever circling back to wonder about me. Priya called me the second she got to her car, half laughing, half in disbelief, and said, "She really has no idea how many people she's burned to get here, does she?" I remember thinking at the time that Chloe's own pattern of betrayal had become so wide and so tangled that it was actually working in my favor. She had too many potential suspects to ever land on the right one. She had absolutely no idea who I'd become in those 8 months. 2 nights before the party, I sat down with my mom over the phone and told her the full plan, start to finish, for the first time. I'd kept her mostly in the dark about the details up to that point, partly to protect her from worrying, partly because I think some part of me needed to be sure I was really going to go through with it before I said it out loud to someone who'd worry about me. She listened without interrupting, and when she finished, she was quiet for a moment before she said, "Your dad would be so proud of how calm you're staying through this." That sentence undid me a little in the best possible way, because if there was one thing my dad taught me growing up, it was that the loudest person in the room isn't always the one who wins the argument. He used to say that the truth told plainly is the sharpest tool anyone can carry, and that people who lie are always, eventually, undone by simple, boring, undeniable facts. I thought about him a lot in those final 2 days, and I thought about how strange it was that the thing helping me walk into that ballroom wasn't anger anymore. It was something closer to his voice in the back of my head, steady and sure. The night before the party, I laid out my outfit, my folder, 4 printed copies of the timeline, and a single flash drive with everything backed up, just in case. I didn't sleep much, but for the first time in almost a year, the thing keeping me up wasn't grief, it was readiness. The night of the engagement party, I got there 20 minutes early, on purpose. I wanted to see the room before it filled up. I wanted to see the arch of white roses I'd helped Chloe pin down on Pinterest years earlier, now standing at the front of a ballroom in a hotel Derek's parents had rented out. I wanted a minute to breathe before I became the person everyone in that room would remember for the rest of their lives. I wore navy blue, not black, not red. I'd thought about that choice more than I probably should have. I didn't want to look like I was in mourning, and I didn't want to look like I was trying to steal attention with something dramatic. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a calm, put-together woman who had nothing to hide and everything to say. Guests started arriving. I said hello to people I hadn't seen in almost a year. Derek's aunt, who hugged me and said, "We've missed you around, sweetheart," clearly with no idea what had actually happened between me and her nephew. A few of our old mutual friends gave me tight, awkward smiles, the kind you give someone when you know something ugly and you're hoping they don't bring it up. I smiled back at all of them, warm and easy, and I let them wonder. I saw Derek first. He was near the bar, laughing at something with his groomsmen, wearing a blazer I recognized because I'd helped him pick it out for his cousin's wedding 2 years earlier. He saw me across the room, and I watched the exact moment his face went pale. He didn't approach me. I think some animal part of him understood instantly that whatever I was there to do, it wasn't going to be undone by a friendly hello. He kept his distance the entire night, which honestly made things easier. Chloe found me about 10 minutes later. She came over with a bright smile plastered on, arms already opening for a hug like we'd never stopped being best friends, like the last 8 months had just been a minor scheduling gap in our friendship rather than the aftermath of the biggest betrayal of my life. "You came," she said, hugging me before I could stop her. "I'm so glad. It means so much to me." I let her hug me. I even said quietly, "Of course I came," and I meant it, just not in the way she thought. I found Derek's mother early in the night near the gift table, and I chatted with her the way I always had. She'd always liked me, always told Derek he was lucky to have found me, and part of me, even after everything, hated how much that memory still meant to me. I slipped one of the printed folders into my clutch, close at hand, and I told her I couldn't wait for the toast. I found Chloe's mother next, near the photo booth she'd insisted on setting up, and did the same thing. Small talk, warmth, patience. I was waiting for one moment, and one moment only. The room started to gather around 8:30. Derek's father, a big, warm man who used to grill burgers for me every 4th of July we spent together, stepped up near the rose arch with a champagne glass, tapping it gently with a spoon, the classic call for everyone's attention. The room did what rooms do in that moment. It quieted, glasses raised, phones came out to record, everyone turning toward the happy couple standing under the arch, hand in hand, faces glowing. Derek's father cleared his throat and started his toast. "When Derek first told us about Chloe," he began, and I remember my whole body going very, very still, "we knew right away this was different. This was real." That's when I stepped forward. I didn't yell. I didn't run up dramatically. I simply walked, calm and steady, until I was standing close enough to the arch that the whole room could see me clearly, and I said the 4 words I'd rehearsed in my head every single night for the past 2 weeks. "Before you say yes." The room turned toward me like one single organism. I saw confusion first, then recognition, and then in some faces, the ones who'd known me longest, a dawning, horrified understanding of exactly who I was and what my showing up here might mean. I looked at Derek's father first. "I'm so sorry to interrupt your toast," I said, and my voice, to my own surprise, came out completely level. "But there's something everyone in this room deserves to know before anyone says any vows tonight, and I think you'd all want to know it now instead of after." Chloe's face had gone white. Derek looked like he might be sick. I didn't look at either of them directly. I kept my focus on the parents because they were the ones I actually owed this to. Derek and I were together for 3 years. We lived together. We were planning a future together. What most of you don't know is that during almost the entirety of our relationship, starting nearly a year before we even broke up, Derek was having an affair with Chloe. Gasps. A few people covered their mouths. I heard someone's champagne glass hit the floor and shatter near the back. I kept going, steady, because I knew if I stopped, the moment would slip away from me. "I'm not here to ruin anyone's night out of spite," I said. "I'm here because I found out the hard way what happens when the people closest to you lie to your face for almost a year. And I don't think any of you, especially you two," I finally turned to Derek's mother and Chloe's mother, "deserve to walk into a marriage in this family without knowing the truth about how it started." I stepped forward and handed Derek's mother one of my printed folders. Then I walked to Chloe's mother and handed her the second one. "Everything in there is real," I said. "Timestamps, messages, dates. I'm not asking anyone to take my word for it. I'm asking you to look at the proof yourselves." Chloe found her voice first. "This is insane," she said, her voice cracking, already pivoting into the performance I somehow knew she'd try. "She's lying. She's clearly still hurt. This is an ambush. This isn't the place." "You're right that it's not the place," I said, cutting her off, still calm. "It wasn't the place when you were texting my boyfriend from the bathroom at my father's memorial dinner either. But here we are." That detail landed like a physical blow across the room. I watched Chloe's mother's face crumple as she flipped open the folder in her hands and saw, in black and white, a timestamp matching that exact date next to a message that made the room's held breath finally break into open murmuring. Derek finally spoke. It's not what it looks like. I can explain." "You had 8 months to explain it to me privately," I said, turning to him for the first time. "You chose silence. I'm not interested in an explanation now in front of your family that you never once offered me in private." A few more guests spoke up in that stretch of chaos before Priya stepped forward, and I think they're worth mentioning because they show how quickly a room can turn once the truth is finally allowed to breathe. One of Chloe's bridesmaids-to-be, a woman named Sarah who had met maybe twice before, said loud enough for half the room to hear, "I told you something felt off about the timeline of all this." Another guest, an older man I didn't recognize, muttered to his wife, just quiet enough that I only caught it because I happened to be standing near them, "This is why I never trusted how fast they moved." Derek's father, still holding the folder his wife had handed him, looked up at his son with an expression I can only describe as devastated confusion, the look of a man realizing in real time, in front of everyone he'd invited to celebrate, that he didn't actually know his own son as well as he thought he did. "Is this true?" he asked Derek, his voice much quieter than it had been moments before, tapping his champagne glass to start the toast. Derek didn't answer right away. That hesitation, that half-second of silence in front of his own father, told the room everything it needed to know before he even opened his mouth to attempt a response. Here's the part I want you to really sit with, because this is the moment that turned an already devastating scene into something none of us, including me, expected. Priya, who I'd invited quietly as my support and who had been standing near the back of the room the entire time, stepped forward. I hadn't planned this part. I want to be honest with you, what happened next wasn't something I orchestrated. It was something the truth simply pulled loose on its own. "There's something else," Priya said, her voice shaking but clear. "Chloe's been messaging her ex Marcus the same way she messaged Derek for the last 4 months. I have the screenshots too if anyone needs them." The room, which I hadn't thought could get any quieter, somehow did. Derek turned to Chloe so fast I actually flinched. "What is she talking about?" Chloe's face, the same face that had smiled at me over wine, that had hugged me 20 minutes earlier and said, "You came, it means so much to me," completely cracked open. She started crying, but not the kind of crying that gets sympathy, the kind that comes from being cornered with absolutely nowhere left to run. "It's not what you think," she said to Derek, which is, I've come to learn, the exact same sentence every unfaithful person says, right before confirming it's exactly what you think. I want to be clear about something here, because I think this is the unexpected twist you were promised at the top of this video. I did not plan for Chloe to be caught cheating on Derek in the middle of her own engagement party. I planned to expose the affair that had happened to me, but betrayal, it turns out, has a strange kind of gravity to it. The same patterns that destroyed my relationship had quietly started destroying theirs, and the truth simply arrived in the same room on the same night because it had nowhere left to hide. What happened over the next 10 minutes was, frankly, not something any script could have written better. Derek's father set down his champagne glass, untouched, and asked everyone to give the families a moment. Guests started quietly filtering toward the exits, phones lowered but clearly not off, because I found out later that at least 3 people had already started texting friends who weren't there, and one cousin had posted a vague but pointed Instagram story that got screenshotted and passed around our extended social circle within the hour. Chloe's mother, holding that folder in shaking hands, said to her daughter, "Is this true?" Chloe didn't answer. That silence told her mother everything she needed to know. Derek's mother turned to me. I braced myself, honestly, for anger, for her to blame the messenger, which happens more than people think in situations like this. Instead, she reached out and took my hand and said, "I am so sorry we didn't know sooner. I am so sorry you carried this alone." Chloe's father, a quiet, reserved man I'd only ever seen at a handful of holiday gatherings over the years, walked over to me before he led his daughter out of the room. I braced for anger the same way I had with Derek's mother. Instead, he just nodded once, slowly, like a man absorbing a verdict he already half suspected, and said, "Thank you for not doing this before we found out the truth for ourselves. We needed to hear it from someone who had nothing left to gain by lying." I didn't fully understand what he meant until later, that he'd apparently had his own quiet doubts about Chloe's honesty over the years, doubts he'd never voiced, doubts that this night finally, painfully confirmed. I'm not going to pretend that moment didn't undo something in me. I'd spent 8 months building armor, and one sentence from a woman who used to make me tea every Sunday afternoon nearly brought me to my knees. I let myself cry, finally, right there in front of everyone. Not from grief this time, but from something closer to relief. The engagement understandably did not survive the night. Derek's father quietly asked the DJ to stop the music. Guests left in clusters, whispering. Chloe's father took her by the arm and walked her out a side entrance, away from the cameras that were by that point definitely still recording on at least a dozen phones. Derek followed a few minutes later alone, and I watched him go without feeling much of anything at all, which honestly surprised me more than any anger would have. I think that's when I knew I was actually free of him, not because I'd humiliated him, because I finally, truly didn't need anything from him anymore. Not an apology, not an explanation, not even his pain, just the truth, out in the open, where it belonged. I want to tell you about a few of the smaller moments from that night, too, because it's the little details that have stayed with me the longest, more than the big dramatic beats. I remember Derek's grandmother, the one who'd called me the good one, the one who'd offered up her own engagement ring, standing near the gift table with her hand pressed flat against her chest, watching the whole thing unfold with an expression that wasn't shock so much as quiet, weary confirmation, like some part of her had always suspected there was a bad one waiting in the wings after all, and it turned out not to be me. I remember one of Derek's groomsmen, a guy named Tom, who I'd always liked, quietly walking over to me afterward, not to comfort me exactly, but to say, "For what it's worth, some of us always thought something felt off. Nobody wanted to say it." I remember thinking in that moment how many people must carry around that same quiet unease about someone in their life, and how rarely any of them ever actually say something before it's too late. I also remember Chloe's youngest cousin, maybe 19 years old, filming the whole thing on her phone without even trying to hide it, tears streaming down her own face for reasons that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with watching her family fracture in real time. I felt for her genuinely. She was collateral damage in something she had no part in creating. And I think that's one of the harder truths about betrayal like this. It never just touches the 2 people who did the betraying. It ripples out into every corner of the room. The fallout in the weeks after was its own kind of payoff, honestly, even though I didn't orchestrate any of it directly. The wedding venue deposit Derek and Chloe had already put down was forfeited. Chloe lost her job about a month later, not because of the affair directly, but because it came out that she'd been using company time and her work email to coordinate some of the earlier messages with Derek, which violated her employer's conduct policy once someone, not me, I want to be clear, I never sent that information to her employer, forwarded screenshots that had already been circulating among our old friend group. Derek moved out of state about 3 months later. I heard, through the same friend group grapevine that once spread lies about me, that he's still single, still struggling to rebuild trust with a family that watched, in real time, the kind of man he'd let himself become. The days immediately following the party were strange in a way I wasn't fully prepared for. My phone didn't stop buzzing for almost 72 hours straight. Texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years, voicemails from Derek's relatives apologizing on his behalf, even a message from a local acquaintance who'd heard about it third hand through a friend of a friend and just wanted to check if I was okay. I turned my phone on Do Not Disturb for most of that first weekend, honestly, because the sheer volume of attention was its own kind of overwhelming, even when almost all of it was supportive. I also got a message from Derek's father about 4 days after the party that I still think about. He didn't try to defend his son. He didn't ask me to reconsider what I'd said or done. He simply wrote, "I raised him better than this, and I failed somewhere along the way. I'm sorry you paid the price for that." I didn't know how to respond to that for almost a full day. Eventually, I just wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." We haven't spoken since, but I think about that exchange more than almost any other part of the aftermath. And me? I finally, for the first time in almost 2 years, felt like I was standing on solid ground. I want to take you out of that ballroom now and into the months that came after, because I think the quiet aftermath of a story like this matters just as much as the dramatic moment everyone remembers. The morning after the party, I woke up on my sister's couch. I still hadn't found my own place yet at that point, and for the first time in almost 2 years, I didn't reach for my phone with that familiar knot of dread in my stomach. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, something quieter than that. Something like relief mixed with grief, mixed with a strange, unfamiliar lightness. I want to be honest with you about something because I think it's important, and because I don't want this story to end with some neat, tidy bow that makes it seem like exposing the truth automatically fixes everything. It didn't. I still had hard days after that party. I still, for months afterward, had moments where I'd see a couple laughing together in a coffee shop and feel a pang of something old and tender. Healing isn't a light switch. It's not before the party I was broken and after the party I was whole. It's slower than that, messier than that. But what that night did give me, and this is the part I want you to really hold on to, was the truth. Finally living out loud instead of curled up quietly inside me like something shameful. For almost a year, I had carried a secret that wasn't even mine to carry. I had smiled through dinners, through group chats, through a hug from a woman who was actively lying to my face because the truth hadn't had anywhere safe to land yet. That night, I gave it somewhere to land, and once it landed, I didn't have to carry it alone anymore. In the weeks after the party, I heard from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old mutual friends who'd quietly drifted away during the relationship reached out to say they were sorry, that they'd always felt something was off but didn't know how to say it. Chloe's mother texted me about 3 weeks later just to say thank you for telling the truth, for not letting her walk her daughter down an aisle built on a lie the way I'd almost been walked down one myself. I didn't expect that message. I think I cried harder reading it than I did during almost any other part of this whole ordeal. I also want to tell you about Priya because she deserves more than a footnote in this story. In the months after the party, we got close, closer than I'd ever been with her before, honestly, because we'd both been through some version of the same betrayal by the same person, just at different points in our lives. She became one of the people I trust most now. Sometimes the worst experiences hand you the truest friendships, almost as a kind of consolation prize you didn't ask for, but end up grateful to receive anyway. About 4 months after the engagement party, I ran into Derek completely by accident in a grocery store parking lot of all places. It was brief, awkward, over in under a minute. He said he was sorry, genuinely, I think, this time, not performing it for an audience the way he had at the party. I told him I appreciated it, and I meant that too, but I also told him that I didn't need his apology anymore because I'd already made peace with the version of him that existed only in my memory of who I thought he was. The real Derek, the one standing in that parking lot, was basically a stranger to me by then. And honestly, that felt like its own kind of victory. Not bitterness, just distance. Clean, quiet distance. I never spoke to Chloe again after that night. Not because I couldn't have. A few mutual friends told me she reached out a couple of times, months later, wanting to talk things through. I never responded. Some relationships, once they show you exactly what they were built on, don't deserve a sequel. I let that door stay closed, and honestly, it's one of the healthiest decisions I made in this entire process. I want to fast forward for you, just for a minute, to about a year after the engagement party, because I think the 1 year later version of this story is honestly just as important as the night itself. A year later, I was living in my own apartment, not my sister's guest room, not the place I'd shared with Derek, but somewhere entirely mine, painted the colors I wanted, decorated with things nobody else had a say in. I'd gotten a dog, a scruffy little rescue mutt named Biscuit, who my dad, if he were still around, would have absolutely spoiled rotten. I'd started running a small local 5K with my sister every few months, something we do now as a tradition, a way of honoring my dad's memory that feels lighter than it used to. I also want to tell you what happened to some of the people on the periphery of this story, because a few of you have asked, in comments on other videos, what happens to the extras in stories like this one. Priya and I are still close. She came to my birthday dinner last month, actually, and we still laugh darkly about how we both ended up as unlikely allies in the same battle against the same person years apart. Derek's grandmother sends me a Christmas card every year, still addressed to me by name, like I never stopped being family in her eyes after I stopped being anyone's girlfriend. I don't know if Derek knows she does that. I've never asked, and I don't plan to. I heard secondhand about 1.5 years after everything happened that Chloe had moved to a different city entirely. A fresh start, I assume, somewhere nobody knew the story yet. Part of me used to feel a flicker of anger at that, at the idea that she got to simply relocate and rewrite herself somewhere new, free of consequence. But mostly now, I just feel a strange, distant kind of pity, because I know from Priya, from the pattern Priya described to me all those months ago, that whatever Chloe is doing in that new city, with new friends, new trust freshly given to her, it's probably only a matter of time before the same pattern finds its way back to the surface. That's not something I'm rooting for exactly. It's just something I've come to understand is simply true about people who've never done the work to change. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this story, it's this. The truth doesn't need you to scream it. It doesn't need you to destroy anything to be powerful. The most devastating thing I ever did to the two people who betrayed me wasn't dramatic, wasn't loud, wasn't even really about them at all in the end. It was simply refusing to let their lie be the only version of the story that got told. For almost a year, Derek and Chloe controlled the narrative of my own life without me even knowing it. They decided what I got to know, when I got to know it, and how much of the truth I was allowed to have. Standing in that ballroom and handing two mothers a folder full of dates and screenshots wasn't revenge in the way people usually mean that word. It was simply me taking back the one thing they'd stolen from me for almost a year without my consent, the truth about my own life. I think about that a lot now, almost 2 years later. I'm in a healthier relationship now with someone who's never once made me feel like I need to double check his phone, his stories, his whereabouts. I got a promotion at work not long after everything settled, which felt like its own quiet kind of justice. Proof that I'd kept building a life during the exact month they thought I was falling apart in silence. And every so often, usually around the anniversary of that engagement party, someone from our old friend group will mention it, half in awe, half still a little stunned, and ask me if I regret how I handled it. I don't. Not for a single second. I know a lot of you watching stories like this one are somewhere in the middle of your own version right now. Maybe you haven't found out yet. Maybe you just found out last week. Maybe you're sitting exactly where I sat on that kitchen floor at 1 a.m, taking screenshots with shaking hands. I want to say something directly to you if that's where you are tonight. You don't have to know your whole plan right now. You don't have to have a ballroom moment picked out or a folder ready or even the first clue what you want to do next. All you have to do tonight is exactly what my mom told me. Get through tonight. Document what you can safely if you're able to. Tell someone you trust. Give yourself permission to grieve something real, even if it turns out the person you were grieving wasn't who you thought they were. The plan will come later, if you want it to, or it might not come at all, and that's okay too. There's no single right way to walk through something like this. The only wrong way is staying silent because you think you have to protect people who never once thought about protecting you. I regret trusting two people who didn't deserve it. I regret not listening to the small, quiet voice inside me that noticed the perfume, the late nights, the way Chloe started pulling away right around the time she should have been pulling closer. But I don't regret standing in that ballroom and telling the truth calmly, clearly, with proof in my hands instead of just pain in my voice. Because here's what I've learned, and I want to leave you with this. The people who hurt you the most are usually counting on your silence to protect them. They're counting on you being too embarrassed, too heartbroken, too exhausted to ever stand up and say what actually happened. Don't give them that. You don't have to scream. You don't have to burn anything down. You just have to refuse to disappear quietly the way they're hoping you will. That's it. That's the whole story, from a rooftop barbecue where I introduced my two favorite people to each other to a ballroom full of white roses where I handed the truth to the two women who deserved to hear it most. If you made it this far with me, genuinely, thank you. Stories like this aren't easy to tell, and they're not easy to hear either, especially if any part of this reminded you of something you've lived through yourself. I want to know what you would have done in my position. Would you have exposed them at the party the way I did? Would you have handled it differently, quieter, louder, sooner? Drop it in the comments below, because I read every single one. And honestly, some of the stories you all share back with me are just as wild as this one. If this story kept you company tonight, do me a favor and subscribe, because there are so many more stories like this one waiting for you. Real people, real betrayals, real endings that actually feel like justice for once. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.